I am Vero, and you're watching Modern Immigrant. Welcome, everybody, to a new episode of Modern Immigrant, a new episode and the final episode of this season 2. Wow, it has been such an amazing journey. For those of you that are new today, maybe this is your first episode, I just want you to know that we have episodes in both English and Spanish, and we have new episodes every Monday. If you're new, you can also check out our Instagram at Modern Immigrant, and remember that subscribing here on YouTube or if you're listening in any of the podcast platforms is so helpful and so important. So thank you so much for being here. And if you are the one that have been kind of like with us during all this period, season 1 and season 2, I just want to say thank you for all the support. You really help us to keep going and keep having this interviews. And today Janina is here with us, which I'm really excited that you're gonna get to experience this conversation in this interview that I have with Janina. Janina's a psychologist and also the founder of La Cocina. I'm gonna leave all the links down below in the description so you can check out the work that she's doing, because something beautiful that she says is that even if you are not in the state where she's located, you can always reach out to her organization to find support for mental health or for health. If you're part of the Latinx community, I know it can be really hard for us. There's a lot of stigma in seeking help, in seeking that support. So please enjoy this interview. We're going to touch on these topics, touch on her immigration, and touch on the different experiences she had when she emigrated to the US, and first the different countries she emigrated in Central America, and how she was able to find herself again, to connect with her roots, and to now make her purpose her work, which I think is something beautiful and something that really inspires me to continue to explore immigration stories like this. So thank you so much one more time for being here. Please stay tuned. We're going to take a little break for the summer, but then we're going to come back for season 3 with a ton of different stories, continuing to support immigrants, to support this community, to grow together, and to remember that, you're not alone in this journey. We're here. So also check out our website, because we have some surprises coming up. We're going to be launching some merch to support immigrant causes. So you want to be checking out modernimmigrant.net, and also our Instagrams at modernimmigrant and at mi.immigration is good, where we're going to be showing all the products so you can also be part of this movement. So thank you. You can support the podcast at buymeacoffee.com/modernimmigrant. Awesome. And Janina is today here with us at Modern Immigrant in a new episode, and I'm excited to have the opportunity to talk to you. So welcome, Janina.
Thank you very much, Vero. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thanks. This is exciting. And I start each interview asking my guests, if they have an immigration story they want to share, or if there's any story of immigration that had impacted you and kind of shaped you. So we'll love to hear from you.
Yeah, for sure. I would say maybe my immigration story is probably the story that most has shaped me in my late adolescence to adult life. I'm an immigrant from El Salvador. I came to the United States with my family. We actually emigrated from Guatemala. So my family had many of the same experiences that a lot of Centroamericanos had in the 80s and 90s of needing to leave our countries of origins because of the Civil War. And so for that same reason, my family at first moved to Honduras and eventually moved to Guatemala. So my childhood was actually a lot of moving and a lot of experiencing myself as an immigrant in different places, actually, in the world. And then finally in the United States, my family immigrated to the U.S. The same reason. In Guatemala also, there was a civil war that broke out. And I was at the time an adolescent. And that totally shaped me. I mean, I did not really think of myself necessarily as an immigrant or as a woman of color, or as a Latina, or as any other identities that today really intersect with each other until I came to the U.S.
That is so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, my work and everything I do, I think, is in some way connected to that story. Yeah.
Yeah, I always say that I started to feel like proud about being Latina when I moved to the US. Like it wasn't a thing
Right,
before, right? I was from
right.
Venezuela and that was it. And then you become like part of a bigger community, which I think it's wonderful. Um, so
Yeah,
when you, it sounded like as you're saying that you were able to experience like different immigrations and moving to the US as a teenager, I can only imagine the challenges or what was kind of going on in
yeah,
your world, especially because you were also, coming with other experiences as an immigrant, right? So how was that? Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So the experience, I think, of moving a lot in childhood, we know is very connected to kind of a pattern of instability, especially for Latinos, and poverty, and
Mm,
encountering kind of a lot of family dynamics that in some cases, and in my family that was true, is multi-generational.
mm,
So when people ask me, where are you from? It's one of the hardest questions for me because I was born in El Salvador. My mother's from Nicaragua, right? My father is from a different place in Central America. And I moved to Honduras. I live in Guatemala. So kind of all over the place. And so one of the things that's interesting to me about that today is that I do think that it shaped very specifically and dynamically kind of what I look for in my emotional work. So I think
mm,
people have purpose and emotional work, right? And this work that really calls you. And
mm.
then you also have maybe work that you just do because you have to. And
Yeah.
so as I started to gain a little more resilience in my immigration journey, and I started to settle a little bit more into
Mm.
what my life would be in the United States, what I was able to do, I think, also is just attach my purpose to that immigration story. And that has been really powerful. It's been very transformative for me.
That is beautiful. And we would love to hear what's that purpose because I think that would tell us a lot about the current work that you do. And while you were talking about that, I was just thinking how wonderful it is when you can actually combine those two things, right? Like when you can make your,
Yeah.
your work and I know it's not really common that that happens, but when you can bring your purpose to, you know, the everyday kind of work. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, like many Latino families who come to the United States by way of kind of the passage from Central America into Mexico and then into the United States, my family really found themselves, I think, in situations here in the United States where there was not the same type of work that my parents thought there would be, or as much work as they thought they would be. And I think this dream that we have that somehow we're going to come to the United States and that things are going to be amazing for us, right?
Mm,
Is is really oversold and highly overrated. And so I think we had that experience as a family. And then in addition to that, prior to that, my mother had never worked. She had primarily been in the home, but here she really had to go to work.
mm,
And so I'm the oldest in my family, and I already had a lot of responsibilities of caring for my siblings, but here it was much more. So I
mm,
think that when you combine a lot of those pressures and the pressure of needing to speak a new language and
mm.
needing to learn a new culture and needing to do the things that you have to do just to survive here, especially in the beginning, in the maybe first 10 years, I would say, then I think it would be normal, right? And we see this all the time for families to really internalize that stress,
Mm.
sometimes in ways that is not very healthy. And I think if you combine that with the history of trauma and war that my family comes from in general, then there's more really to consider. And so for me, I think that my purpose is directly aligned to how do I heal this aspect of my family
Mm.
story.
Mm.
And so it's not a surprise that today I'm a psychologist. So I'm a neuropsychologist, and I'm the founder and CEO of an organization called La Cocina, which provides no cost mental health support services to the Latino community in Colorado.
How amazing. That is just such an amazing kind of story of how you were able to use all of those struggles and challenges and redirect those to serve the community
Yeah.
and to serve the Latinos. And
Yeah.
I was wondering, and this is a topic that we explore a lot in the podcast, which is the, you were talking, I think you used the word kind of surviving, right? Like when you try to adapt to a new culture and you need to assimilate and speak a new language. Um, how have been the process in your life after all these years in kind of like adapting to the US, but also staying true to your roots and to your background? Because I think that's something that we struggle a lot with, and I don't know, maybe listeners will like to hear that from a person that came here as a teenager, right? Which a lot of your adulthood years happen here.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I actually think that in large part I have my family to credit, my parents. So even though we were immigrants and our primary language was Spanish, even as we started to speak more English outside of the home, right? So especially those of us who were younger, it was much harder. My father never really learned to speak English. So my father passed away 2 years ago. And
I'm
I
sorry.
always reflect on how his own protest was, I'm just not going to do this, right? It
Yeah.
was very magical in some
His
way. My
statement.
mother, yeah, it
Yeah.
was his statement, it was his protest. My mother learned to speak English, and my mother speaks pretty good English. And so for her, and for us, I think, who were going to school, right, and trying to really, in some ways at that time, we spoke about it as assimilation. I think she also and my father would have very clear boundaries, right? Of at home, we maintain our culture. So we speak our language and we eat our food and we cook our food and we do the things that connect us to the culture that we come from. Mm. And so I think that seed was there very, very early on in our immigration story. And then I actually did go through a period myself where I tried very hard to dispose myself of that identity. It was very difficult to be a Latina at that time in the United States. And I have the privilege of being a light-skinned Latina, so I can get away with a lot, actually. People might think she has a little bit of an accent, or, they might think, well, she looks a little different, but we don't really know what to do with that, right? So I don't get a label just because of the color of my skin, which is a huge privilege. And so because of that, I was able to almost like hide myself for about 10 years.
Wow.
That was part of my journey. And, when I saw that, like when I really understood that and understood all the parts of myself that I was really suppressing and hiding, it was really painful. And it made for a very big, almost like reclaiming, right, of who I am and my history and everything that I really stand for as a Latina woman. So I think it was, it was very much a struggle of two or many different identities and this thing we call biculturality, which in my case was already multiculturality, right? And then saying, I can't do that right now. I need to focus on this. And then coming back to it.
And I love that you're talking about this because I don't think I appreciate your honesty and I appreciate you saying this was a thing. Like I was trying to hide it and I struggle because sometimes I have felt the same way, but if you don't hear people going through the same, you think that you're doing something wrong or why am I trying to blend in? And we really do that because we need to kind of move forward, right? And the whole culture is kind of made for, people that speak a certain way and look a certain way. So it's hard. And I really appreciate you sharing this. And I feel curious to hear about, like, do you think it was your own kind of personal, not personal, but like your profession, you think it helped, the fact that you were studying psychology to kind of look at these things? Or what happened that made you realize, like, I'm doing this and I want to feel more connected to my Latinidad?
Well, initially I did not actually study psychology. I actually initially studied marketing and communications. And so in that world, at the time, it was almost impossible to really find anybody who was willing to bring a voice to that bicultural or multicultural message And even though Latinos were already coming into the country, and it was a time when many of us received amnesty as part of our immigration story, um, you know, going from a space where you were highly, highly rejected to a space where maybe some aspects of you were welcome, that took a long, long time, a very long, long time. And so even just sheer numbers, there were not enough of us, right, in the United States. So I think that I would say that the reclaiming piece really came about because I ended up taking a trip to Central America. I hadn't been back in years. I couldn't go back for a long time because I didn't have the right documentation to go back, but also I didn't go back because of financial reasons and whatnot. And when I finally went back after living in the US maybe 7 or 8 years, something like that, I just had really a truly like dawning. It was really like a new birth of myself, experiencing myself in a place where I grew up, that I loved, that I knew. And I just thought to myself, what am I doing? Like, what is happening to me, you know?
Yeah.
And it didn't take but a moment to say, no more, no more. Like, I'm not going to hide this.
How pretty. Yeah, I love it. I love hearing those stories, and I love hearing those moments where you like reconnect with a huge part of who you are and where you come from. So that is really beautiful. And I also want to talk about La Cocina that you just mentioned, and I would love to hear what it is. What's the I know you're doing mental health work for the Latino community, but yeah, tell us a little bit about how did it start? Why La Cocina? Why thy name?
Yeah. Well, okay, so it's called La Cocina because it would be really, I think it would be awful for our community to go to a place called Latino Mental Health Center or something like that.
That's just so smart. Yes, that is true.
Well,
we wouldn't, yeah.
We would not want to go there. So the name actually comes from, we've been around for about 5 years, almost 5 years now. And the name actually came about because we did have our very first meeting with community. We had it in a kitchen, in La Cocina. And when we had that meeting, people talked about, even after that meeting, I could hear people at the doorway as they were leaving. Somebody said to someone else, aquí vamos a cocinar nuestros problemas. We're going to cook our problems here.
That's and I thought, good.
This is amazing, you know? It was so powerful to hear people relate to something that didn't have a particular label on it. And of course, La Cocina is such an important place for us, for our families. It's a place where we connect about everything, the good, the bad, the ugly, right? Yeah. And it's also one of my favorite quotes from Dolores Huerta, when Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez organized in California during the migrant workers union protest. They would do it in people's kitchens, and they would end their meetings saying, todas las revoluciones comienzan en la cocina.
That is so amazing. I was, when you were talking about this, I was just thinking that is such an amazing space, really. Like, I remember growing up in Caracas, and we had like a huge kitchen, and it was almost like we would tell people, you know, you can move to the living room, like, let's go to the living room and talk. And people will be just in this, it was like a hole, it was like this long kitchen kind of thing. And people would just be right there hanging out, and everything would happen there. And it's just, it's something that I haven't experienced here in the US, which is interesting. There's like a place where, you know, or in front of the TV, and those were things that would never happen back home. And so how pretty to move it, because I do think that there's a lot of stigma in the Latino community in terms of mental health. So I wonder, how do you see that changing? Because I do think things are changing for Latinos in the US, and we're seeing more representation, and we're seeing more of us speaking up. So I'm guessing that's also benefiting the approach with mental health.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think that, you know, defining what we want the mental health space to look like for ourselves is really important. And, historically, a lot of the methods that are about therapy and mental health treatments that have been applied to Latinos and to Black and Indigenous people are really not useful, and they have not been effective. So yes, as a whole, as a culture, we don't want anybody to think of us as being locos, right? But then the other piece of it is that there is a reason why we also feel that way, because if we go to speak to somebody and then they are so misaligned with the way that we see ourselves, then we're not going to feel good about that interaction, and we're not going to go back. And in fact, Latinos are one of the groups that most drop out of therapy.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, more than 53% of the time. So much more than half, actually. So that's really important, because if we're dropping out of a traditional kind of way of thinking about mental health treatment, but we really need it, then what's wrong here? Is it us because we don't think of it, or is it the system, right? Which one isn't working for us? So I think part of our journey really has been about that. It has been about acknowledging that a lot of the ways that traditional mental health care gets applied in community settings just doesn't work.
What's a non-traditional way to approach it if somebody's listening and they want to, check out the work that you'll do or find something similar? Because I do get a lot of people asking me this, and myself, like, I continue to see like a therapist from back home, and we talk over Skype, right? Because I haven't made that transition to say, okay, I'm going to find a therapist here in Seattle, because I know we're going to have a huge gap in terms of cultural issues and just things are not going to feel the same. So what can people look for in terms of the style of mental health?
Oh, that's a tough question.
I know.
We actually search a lot for other folks who are doing similar things, and there are not a lot of cocinas around.
They're not, besides the ones in our homes.
Exactly. So yeah. I think it's a very tough space for those of us who do need to be culturally aligned. I mean, all of us need some aspect of our culture, right, to be acknowledged. Yeah. It's also our emotional language, by the way. So if we are immigrants, like I'm an immigrant, and I find myself in therapy, I often start thinking in Spanish right away. Right? Yes. Because it's my emotional language. And so being able to find someone that can align with you that way is really important. Don't be afraid to say no to other people and to keep looking. That's, I think, one piece that is really important. Then the other thing I would suggest is don't be afraid to call cultural or community-based organizations who really sometimes have the best pulse on who's doing that kind of work. We sometimes think that because, and we're trained, of course, this way, like Latinos, we think, oh, we have to go to the doctor, right? And that's fine, but just know that your doctor may not always know where is the best place. So don't be afraid to call some of those community-based organizations that have services in Spanish and that have programming in Spanish, where you feel like you're culturally aligned. Don't be afraid to call them and just say, so what therapists are working with the Latino community and how can I connect with them? Because they will know. They will know.
Yeah, that's a great advice and a great tip, just to keep trying to and to keep looking. And there's no, anything wrong if you didn't click or if it wasn't the right person, just to continue to search. Like, and that shouldn't discourage you either. Like, oh, I didn't have a good interaction with this therapist and then I'm dropping, this doesn't work. Right? Like, yeah.
That's right. No, and in fact, remember, right, what I just said about the statistics, it's not usually you.
Exactly.
Right? So don't take it on, like, don't think it's about you. Just say, well, that person doesn't know how to work with me, so I need to find somebody else.
Yeah, and there was a question that I actually heard yesterday at a panel, and I want to ask you this because it was a panel with students from middle school, and they were asking that they didn't know if their parents were immigrants because they moved to the US like 17 years ago. And I thought it was cute, that concept of like wondering, when are you an immigrant and when you're not? And there were like different answers, and people were kind of saying like, well, there's the legal part and then there's the what you identify. And I love that you call yourself, I'm an immigrant, and I know you have been here for a while, and I know you have, created your life here. So what would you tell someone that's kind of like, I don't know how to identify myself in the process of being an immigrant or not? There's a lot of stigma, I know, with that term too, so.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of persecution and stigma. So yes, it's very understandable when people don't want to use the word. And I would say that the other thing I hear in what those young people are saying is, I'm not sure, right, which part of my culture to identify with, right? Do I identify with that part that has to do with my parents' life, which comes from somewhere else? Or do I identify with what I experienced at school, for example? And what I really love to encourage youth to think about is that you can try putting both on and then see how that works for you. So you can try just saying, I'm actually both, and then seeing what that's like for you. And we know that young people who can do that, their brains kind of explode with magical cells that protect them from all sorts of things,
Amazing.
But we really know this from the science, that a person who's able to completely integrate their bicultural status or multicultural status, that their brains literally are different and are much more complex and able to handle difficulty.
That is such a wonderful
doing.
I would encourage everyone doing that. I didn't know that kind of like chemical response. That's so amazing to know that your brain literally expands.
Your brain responds very positively to you kind of integrating that. And also, if you're young and you're kind of going, I don't really know this thing about immigration, right? That sometimes also has to do with families have a really hard time telling their stories because there can be some trauma attached to it. And so I always tell young people, don't be afraid to sit down with your parents and to just say, tell me the story of what it was like to come here. Because you might find that actually there's something in there you didn't know about your parents.
Yeah, and they might be really willing to tell you. They just haven't had that opportunity to have that conversation.
Yeah. And sometimes parents don't know that they have permission to tell it. They don't know that it's okay to speak about it. So if you open that door for them, it could be amazing.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much, Janina. That's such an amazing, just experience and journey that you have been able to go through. And just to end the today's conversation, I would love for people to know how can they connect with La Cocina, if they have to only be in Colorado, or if there's a way for them to connect even if they're outside.
Yes, so thank you for that. So there are ways you can connect with us outside of Colorado. Not for therapy specifically, because we have certain laws that are governed by states that don't allow us to practice outside of Colorado. But we have a lot of programming that people all over Latin America and all over the United States actually hear through our Facebook page. So we have a Facebook program called Al Divan that is on our Facebook page that you're welcome to listen to and to connect with us live when we do it live. It's really fun, and it's actually filled with all sorts of interesting experiences about how to heal from all sorts of things. And the other thing is, on our Facebook page, we also have Respiro Hoy, which is like a daily, almost like meditation that you can practice with us, where you can actually really learn about how to calm your nervous system. And if you're recently here and you're finding yourself with a lot of anxiety, for example, that could be a really good tool. So yes, we have some resources. And the other thing that you can certainly do is just connect with us anyway, even though you might be having a trouble like finding a therapist, and if we can help in any way, we would be happy to help.
That is awesome. And I will make sure I add those links to the description of this episode so people can check out those resources. I think the more we try on things, the strategies, resources, there's nothing to lose, right? There's just something we can gain.
Yes, and as you said earlier, it's really okay to say, well, this didn't really work for me, so I'm going to try something else. Totally fine. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Janina, this was an amazing time and conversation. I really appreciate you coming to Modern Immigrant and sharing your story.
Thank you so much, Vero.
Yeah.
It's really a pleasure. Mucho gusto. Saludos a todos tus oyentes.
Un placer. Muchísimas gracias.
Gracias.
Adiós.
Hasta luego.